She handed me a fake eviction notice for land I own outright. She had no idea what I found next. If you love watching entitled HOA Karens lose in court, subscribe now. This one's brutal. She banged on my door at 6 a.m., waving a piece of paper like it was a weapon. "You have 30 days to vacate," she said. "This property belongs to the HOA now." I own 11 acres. I have the deed. I have the title. And this woman, who's never paid a single dollar toward my land, just told me I don't belong on it anymore. What happened next put her name in a courtroom transcript she'll never forget. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that thinks it owns you, you need to see how this ends. Subscribe now, because this story gets worse before it gets so much better. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened on a quiet Tuesday morning when a woman named Deborah Ashcroft, HOA board president, self-appointed queen of Millbrook Estates, decided my 11 acres of inherited land belonged to her committee. I'd bought the land from my grandfather's estate 2 years earlier. Paid it off in cash. No mortgage, no HOA agreement, nothing. My property wasn't even inside the HOA's legal boundary, a fact I'd checked twice before signing anything. But Deborah didn't care about boundaries. She cared about control. It started small. A letter about my fence being non-compliant, then a fine for a shed I built on my own land, one she claimed violated community aesthetic standards. I ignored the letters. That was my first mistake. In her mind, silence meant surrender. Then came the knock at 6 a.m. She stood on my porch in workout clothes, holding a laminated document with the HOA's letterhead, flanked by a man I didn't recognize. "This is your official eviction notice," she said, thrusting it into my hands like she was serving royalty. "The board voted. You're in violation of covenant restrictions. You have 30 days. I laughed. I actually laughed right there on my porch, because the audacity was almost impressive. "Ma'am," I said, "my property isn't part of..." "Your HOA never has been." Her face twitched. "The board's attorney disagrees." That's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. Somehow, some way. Deborah Ashcroft and her board believed they could seize 11 acres of privately owned land through sheer paperwork and intimidation. I took a photo of the notice. I took a photo of her, and I told her one sentence that made her smile disappear. "You just handed me evidence." She didn't know what I did for a living. She didn't know I'd spent 6 years working land disputes as a paralegal before switching careers. She didn't know I still had contacts. She didn't know that within an hour that laminated eviction notice would be sitting on a real estate attorney's desk, and within a week a judge would be reading it too. But the real shock wasn't the notice. It was what I found when I pulled the county property records that same afternoon. A discovery that would turn this from a petty HOA dispute into something Deborah Ashcroft never saw coming. What I found in the county records made my stomach drop, and then made me smile. The HOA didn't just claim my land by mistake. Someone had filed paperwork. 6 months earlier, a document had been submitted to the county recorder's office attempting to redraw the HOA's boundary lines, lines that, if accepted, would have swallowed my entire 11 acres into Millbrook Estates jurisdiction. The signature at the bottom? Deborah Ashcroft. She'd forged an amendment to the community's governing plat map. Not misinterpreted, not assumed, forged. And she'd done it so quietly that the county clerk hadn't even flagged it, because HOA boundary amendments rarely get scrutinized unless someone challenges them. I was the someone. I called my old contact from my paralegal days, a real estate attorney named Marissa who owed me a favor from years back. I sent her photos of the eviction notice, the forged filing, and my original deed. Her response came in 4 minutes. "Do not engage with this woman again. Let me handle it." For the next 9 days, nothing happened. No letters, no knocks. Silence so complete it felt unnatural. I later learned why. Marissa had quietly filed a formal complaint with the county, alleging fraudulent alteration of recorded property boundaries. A criminal referral, not just a civil one. Then, on day 10, I got a call that changed everything. "They're moving forward with a hearing," Marissa said. "The HOA board is trying to get an injunction to force your compliance before the fraud complaint gets traction. They want to beat us to the courthouse." I felt my pulse spike. "Can they do that?" "They can try," she said. "But Deborah just made her second mistake." "What's that?" "She listed herself as the sole authorizing signature on the injunction request, which means legally. She just tied her own name to every fraudulent document in this case." I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something sharper, because 2 days later a black SUV pulled into my driveway, and it wasn't Deborah. It was the HOA's attorney, and he wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to make me an offer I was never supposed to refuse. The attorney's name was Grant Holloway. Sharp suit, sharper smile, the kind of confidence that comes from winning cases he shouldn't win. He didn't get out of the car right away. He just rolled down the window and said, "You've got a decision to make. Drop the fraud complaint, sign a quitclaim easement for the disputed boundary strip, and the HOA drops the injunction. Clean slate. No court, no headlines, no mess." I stood in my own driveway, staring at a man offering to make my problem disappear, as if a forged land grab was something you could just paper over with a handshake. "And if I don't?" I asked. He shrugged like it barely mattered to him. "Then this goes to a judge. Injunctions are messy. Fraud complaints are messier. Judges don't like messy. You could win technically and still lose 2 years of your life to litigation." It was a threat wrapped in a business card. I almost believed him. That's the terrifying part about people like Grant. They're paid to make the truth sound negotiable. But then I remembered something Marissa told me the night before. Grant Holloway doesn't know we already have the forensic handwriting analysis back. He's negotiating from a position he thinks is strong. It isn't. So I smiled, the same smile Deborah gave me on my porch 3 weeks earlier, and said, "I'll think about it." He left. I called Marissa immediately. "They're panicking," she said. "You don't offer a settlement like that unless you're scared of what a judge will find." 2 days later, we walked into the county courthouse for the injunction hearing. Deborah sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed like she was attending a gala, flanked by Grant and 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. The judge, a stone-faced woman named Judge Colette Reyes, known locally for having 0 patience for HOA overreach, flipped through our filed evidence for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked up, not at me, at Deborah. "Ms. Ashcroft," she said, voice flat and cold, "can you explain to me why the boundary amendment filed under your signature does not match the notarization date claimed on the document?" Deborah's face went pale. My assistant handled the filing," she stammered. Judge Reyes leaned forward. "Your assistant forged your signature? Or did you forge a notary's stamp?" The courtroom went dead silent. And that silence stretched just long enough for me to realize this wasn't just about my land anymore. Judge Reyes wasn't just skeptical. She was furious. Judge Reyes didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was more terrifying than any shouting could have been. "Ms. Ashcroft," she said, "you are asking this court to grant an injunction based on a boundary amendment that appears to be fraudulently notarized. Do you understand the gravity of what you just admitted?" Deborah's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, my client misspoke." "Sit down, Mr. Holloway," Judge Reyes said without even looking at him. "I asked your client a direct question." The courtroom felt smaller with every second of silence. Deborah's hands trembled around a folder she hadn't opened once. The board members beside her had inched their chairs subtly away from her, like she'd become radioactive. "I believe the amendment was procedurally valid," Deborah finally said. "Procedurally valid," the judge repeated, flat as stone. "Ms. Ashcroft, Procedural validity requires an actual notary, not a stamp borrowed from your neighbour's home office, which, according to the forensic report submitted by opposing counsel, is exactly what happened here. I felt Marissa's hand grip my arm under the table. This was the moment. Judge Reyes continued, "This court finds no legal basis for the requested injunction. Furthermore, given the evidence of fraudulent notarization and unauthorized alteration of recorded property boundaries, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review." Deborah's face crumbled. Not from sadness, from realization. Real consequences were suddenly not hypothetical anymore. "Your Honor," Grant tried again, "surely a private resolution—" "There will be no private resolution for forged government filings, Counselor," Judge Reyes snapped. "This isn't a dispute over paint colors or fence height. This is fraud. And I take fraud against private property owners very seriously in this court. Room." She turned to me for the first time. "Sir, the injunction is denied. Your property boundary stands as originally recorded. You are free to pursue full civil damages if you choose." I nodded, throat tight, heart hammering. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, threats and intimidation, undone in under 20 minutes by one furious, unshakable judge. But as we stood to leave, Deborah turned to me one final time. And what she whispered under her breath wasn't an apology. It was a warning that told me this fight wasn't over. Not even close. "This isn't finished," Deborah hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "You have no idea who sits on that HOA board with me." I almost laughed again. Almost, because 3 weeks ago that threat might have scared me. Now, it just sounded like the last gasp of someone who'd already lost. 2 months later, here's what happened. The District Attorney's Office picked up the fraud referral immediately. Forensic evidence doesn't leave much room for interpretation. Deborah was charged with forgery and filing a false instrument with the county recorder, both felonies in our state. She resigned from the HOA board the same week the charges were announced. Though resigned is generous. The remaining board members voted her out within 48 hours, desperate to distance themselves before the fallout reached them too. Turns out mine wasn't the only property she'd tried this with. Marissa's investigation uncovered 2 other boundary amendments filed under Deborah's signature over the previous 3 years, one against an elderly widower who'd simply paid the fraudulent fine out of fear, never knowing he had every right to fight back. That case reopened too. As for me, I filed the civil suit Judge Reyes said I was entitled to. 6 months later, it settled. Deborah's homeowner's insurance covered damages for harassment, legal fees, and emotional distress. Not because she wanted to pay, because her attorney told her a jury would destroy her if this went to trial. Grant Holloway, by the way, quietly stopped representing the HOA altogether. Turns out reputational damage cuts both ways in small legal communities. I still own my 11 acres. Still no HOA, still no fence violations because there's no HOA left with any claim to enforce them. The new board sent me a formal letter of apology, laminated, ironically, just like Deborah's fake eviction notice had been. I framed it. It hangs in my hallway now, right next to a copy of Judge Reyes's ruling. Because here's the truth this whole ordeal taught me. An HOA is not a government. A board president is not a judge. And a piece of laminated paper means nothing against a deed, a title, and the truth. Deborah Ashcroft tried to take my land with a lie. She'd lost everything trying. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, imagine what happens when property owners fight back and win even bigger. Subscribe now, because the next HOA horror story might be the wildest one yet.